I've always had a passion for Scottish history, and in particular I've had a passion for the Battle of Bannockburn and the Scottish Wars of Independence. Now, I don't stay too far from Bannockburn, and I've read all the stories about where and when the battle is supposed to have taken place. There's never been a definitive site found for Day 2 of the Battle of Bannockburn, and I believe that until some new documentation or archaeological evidence is found, that it will always remain an area up for debate. However, due to my interest, I've decided to come and have a look myself, look at the areas that are talked about in the battle, come and view it for myself, walk the land, check the topography, and see if I can form my own opinion as to what might have taken place back on June the 23rd and 24th in 1314. Now, the Battle of Bannockburn came about because King Alexander III of Scotland died unexpectedly. And in due course, the Scots went to King Edward I of England and asked him to adjudicate as to who the next King of Scotland should be. Seeing this as an opportunity, he basically grasped it with both hands and basically said that I'll choose your king as long as he's subservient to me. And John Balliol was the chosen man. Now, he wasn't a strong man, and effectively Edward ruled over him, subjugated him, humiliated him, and the Scots came under the overlordship of King Edward I of England. But the Scots people rebelled against that, starting with Wallace, who, of no great noble birth, united the people of Scotland and defeated the English at the Battle of Stirling. Unfortunately, he was defeated a year later at the Battle of Falkirk, and the English garrisoned the castles throughout Scotland for about the next 10 years, subjugating Scotland and its people. But during that period, Robert the Bruce came to the fore, and he was a man who ultimately united Scotland once more and defeated the English at the Battle of Bannockburn, which didn't complete their quest for independence, but was a significant turning point in ultimately gaining independence for Scotland from the English invaders once more. So I'm going to go around the significant points of the battle, going to look at them, and hopefully you can provide some comment as well, and we can form an opinion as to what we think might have happened on June 23rd, 24th, 1314. Now, one of the great stories from day one of the Battle of Bannockburn was about Robert the Bruce and his confrontation with an English knight called Henry de Bohun. Henry de Bohun had crossed, probably at the Milton Ford, with an advanced party of knights on their way to Stirling Castle, where when they were out in front, they came across Bruce out in front of his troops. And there's two stories as to what happened. De Bohun, seeing his opportunity for glory, lowered his lance, charged at Bruce. Bruce, being an experienced warrior, knew how to handle such a situation, dodged the lance, rose in his stirrups, and crashed his axe right off de Bohun's head, killing him. The second story was that de Bohun was out in front. Seeing it was outnumbered, Bruce had troops behind him, turned to flee. Bruce rode him down, taking his axe off his head and killing him. I don't believe that he was fleeing. This was a creme de la creme of the English army. This was the nobles, the knights in armour, probably equal, if not the best, in Europe. They were arrogant and they were up here to try and prove a point. My own opinion is that de Bohun took his chance and charged at Bruce, looking for glory. Bruce, being the experienced man that he was, he didn't panic. He seen it coming, took evasive action, and as de Bohun went past him with his lance, Bruce did rise in his stirrups, bringing his axe down on de Bohun's head, killing him, and famously breaking his good axe, his good trusty axe, in the process. This was a great morale booster for the Scots. For them to see their own king out in front, willing to stand up to the might of the English knights, the vanguard, the creme de la creme. This was a fantastic morale booster for them and a great blow to the morale of the English. As the rest of the English vanguard advanced down to the castle, they were met by the Scottish schiltrons, who stood steadfast and did not let them pass, forcing them back, unhorsing Gloucester, one of the English leaders, almost capturing him, and ultimately forcing the English back over the Bannockburn. After which they proceeded down to the Carslands, where they camped for the evening, awaiting day 2 of the battle. So day 1, to me, it wasn't a day of skirmishes. It was a major confrontation with the elite of the English army, meeting the body of the Scots, who were determined they were not going to pass and relieve the castle. And the Scots succeeded. A fantastic start for them, but they still had a major battle to come. And they knew they were outnumbered considerably, by at least 2 to 1. We reckon there was up to perhaps 20,000 English troops, which included 2,000 mounted cavalry, and anywhere between about 6,000 and 10,000 Scots. So whatever happened, it was going to be a major exercise in trying to win the day. But I'll take you down to the Milton Ford. We'll see where the English had crossed and perhaps some of the difficulties that they faced and what the Scots were defending and why the Scots were determined to push them back over there. So this is the Milton Ford on the Bannockburn, where the English vanguard crossed, led by Hereford and Gloucester. And they would have continued on down this road, ostensibly, to relieve Stirling Castle. And with them would be a knight called Henry de Bohun, who famously met his end at the hands of Robert the Bruce just further down this road. Now to the south here, you'll have the Roman road, which was also an access into Stirling. Now, was there a bridge on that was passable back in the day? Perhaps some of you could let me know. And further south again, you had Charters Hall, where it's possible to ford. But that would bring you to the rear of the Milton Bog and the Halberts Bog, which are a kind of natural defence to the Scottish right flank, and also defended by Edward Bruce. So I believe some English knights did try to cross down there, and they were repulsed by Edward Bruce. Now, Clifford and Beaumont, another 2 English knights with their contingent of about 300 knights, they went down the far banking of the Bannockburn up to the north, and we know that there was a passage across the Carsland to get to the castle because Philip Mowbray, who was the captain of the castle garrison, had already come out to meet King Edward II of England, and they had had discussions. So we know that there was a pathway to the castle across the Cars somewhere. Now, were they going to the castle to relieve it? Now, ostensibly, it had already been relieved. Mowbray had been out, spoke to King Edward II and said, as far as he was concerned, the castle had been relieved. But Edward hadn't come all this way just to relieve the castle. He'd brought 20,000 troops with him, and he was determined he was going to teach Robert the Bruce and the Scots a lesson. Bruce, of course, had other ideas. So I believe that Clifford and Beaumont had taken this route to come in and circle round to the rear of the Scots. So you'd have Gloucester and Hereford taking the schiltrons from the front, and Clifford and Beaumont coming in from the rear. However, Bruce, being the master tactician that he was, had thought about all of this, and he had set up Thomas Randolph, the Earl of Moray, to meet anyone coming from the rear or trying to get to the castle. And Randolph, seeing Clifford and Beaumont, a little bit late as it turns out, but nonetheless, seeing them, marched down onto the field to confront the 300 knights. And they had a battle down there. And it's one of the first times in this country where Scottish, or where foot soldiers, but on this occasion Scottish foot soldiers, had overcome mounted cavalry, because they sent Clifford and Beaumont packing, some on towards the castle, but after a fierce battle, most of them went back over the Cars to join the main body of the English army who had gone down there later on in the day to camp for the night. Now Gloucester and Hereford had met Robert the Bruce heading down this way towards St Ninians, and the Scottish Schiltrons stood firm, pushing Gloucester and Hereford back, unseating Gloucester from his horse, almost capturing him, and ultimately they retreated back over the Bannockburn here and followed the main body of the English army down onto the Cars where they camped for the evening. So the questions I have for this area: could we potentially get 1700 mounted cavalry across here? Did we have a potential crossing place at the Roman Road and further down at Charters Hall? And we know that 300 of the knights initially went down onto the Carse land and across that way. So it's a question that I pose. Perhaps some of you can give me an answer to that. It does seem to be quite a constricted area to be getting upwards of 1,000 mounted cavalry across here. It'd be a bit of a mud bath, that's for sure. But let me know your thoughts. But here we are, this is the Milton Ford, the main crossing point into Stirling. I've come down onto the Carse land at Bannockburn, where it's considered the battle may have taken place. I'll try and give you some indication of my location. To the south of me here, about 30 metres away, I've got the main railway going into Stirling. Beyond that, beyond the housing estate, it will take you to the foots of Balquidderock Wood, up which you go to the dry field in Bannockburn High School. To my left, I've got the Bannockburn as it winds its way onto the Carse, having come down the slope from Bannockburn itself. To my right, I've got the Pell Stream about 800 metres away. And away in the distance there, you've got the confluence of the Pell Stream and the Bannockburn, beyond which it becomes tidal. Now my thoughts are that when the English came down, they would have crossed the Bannockburn in the vicinity of the railway bridge which comes over the burn. The land is gently sloping there on either side, and the burn is narrow. It makes an ideal fording place. The more you come into the Carse, it starts to incise into the Carse, and it would be difficult for carts and heavy horse to get across there. So I do believe, just like that train pass, I do believe that this is the area in which you cross, the vicinity of the rail bridge, onto the Carse. I guess the million-dollar question is, where did the English camp for the evening? Because if we could find that out, that would set us up to know where the battle took place. So the thoughts are that they camped in this area, with their backs to the Pell Stream and the Bannockburn. Mackenzie, one of the chroniclers from about 1913, wrote that he thought they camped beyond, north of the Pell Stream, because that was hard, fast ground up there. And others think they camped at the foot of St Ninians. So let's look at the three of them. If you were to camp at the foot of St Ninians, does that not take you a wee bit close to the Scottish camp? Would there not be fear of a night attack, or even arrows coming in through the night to keep you on your toes, keep you awake, keep you tired? Personally, I think going to St Ninians to camp would be too close to the Scottish camp. What about this area in the Carse? Well, if you look at the topography of this area 700 years ago, it's considered that the area from the bottom of the Balquidderock Wood up to about the Pell Stream was peat covered. So it would be boggy, marshy, be lots of pools in here. It'd be difficult to traverse. One, is that an area you'd wish to camp in? There are indications that they do say that they camped in a marshy area, but two, would you want to form up your cavalry on that? Surely that would be a hindrance to your cavalry. Would you want to be here? What about going north of the Pell Stream? It's not too far a distance, especially when you've walked hundreds of miles already. We know that that was harder, faster ground. It was newer laid down ground, there was no peat on it, and it would make ideal camping ground. So given those potential 3 camping areas, what does that mean for the battle? Well, if the battle was here between the Pell Stream and the Bannockburn, it would tie in with some reports that the English were hemmed in, they had little room for manoeuvre, and it kind of probably edges ahead as being the favourite. St Ninians could have went over there, no matter where they camped, and fought there. Yes, they could have. That is now pretty much all housing estate, and it's going to be difficult to determine if anything took place there. But what about across the Pell Stream? Could it have happened there? Once again, it could have. All it said was that they were constrained to a narrow area. Now, the area north of the Pell Stream, between the Pell Stream and the Bannockburn and the Forth, is slightly wider than the area between the Pell Stream and the Bannockburn. But when English were fleeing, it talked about them running into the slimy mud of the Bannockburn. So surely that means tidal mud, and you'll only get that north of the Pell Stream, because the Pell Stream Bannockburn confluence is roughly where the tidal limit is. On occasion perhaps getting slightly higher, but roughly in the Pell Stream Bannockburn confluence. It also said that many of the English drowned in the Forth, fleeing northwards. If they were fighting in this area, would you not flee eastwards, directly across the Bannockburn? Seems to make sense to me. If you're in the area north of the Pell Stream, your escape would be the Bannockburn or the Forth. And we know that some of the English, including Edward himself, fled to the castle. So once again, if the battle was in this area, and you were constrained between the Bannockburn and the Pell Stream during the fight, how easy would it have been for them to flee to the castle? Did they go through the Scots? Did they go north over the Pell Stream then along there? Now we know that somewhere in this area there was a route to the castle across the Bannockburn and up towards the Torwood, because the captain of the garrison, Philip Mowbray, had come out the day before, somehow managed to get across this ground, and he met with Edward and had discussions with him about the forthcoming battle. So we know there was a route across the Carse somewhere up towards the castle. Myself, I'm a great believer in new roads tend to be built on top of older roads. Seems to make sense. So you've got the A905, which comes from Falun, crosses the A91 and takes you right in towards Stirling. And would that perhaps eventually take you around the back of the castle, joining up with where the old Stirling Bridge would come across? That's food for thought. So we've got to consider these things to give us an idea of where we think the battle might be. I guess the only other thing that's going to let us know definitively is if we find some archaeological evidence. And the biggest one would be, where are the bodies? Who knows how many people were killed, but we know it's well into the hundreds, perhaps the thousands. And we know that they were buried on the battlefield, because the next day, an English knight, Marmaduke Twain, he met Bruce on the battlefield, and he noted that large pits were being dug to bury the bodies. So what kind of preservation would they be in after 700 plus years? I'm sure even after that time there would be some trace of them. Has anybody looked in this area? Have they found any? I don't know. If the battle took place closer towards the foot of St Ninians, that's pretty much all housing estate now. And if it was north of the Pell Stream, that's still farmland. So there's a potential for finding stuff in this area. But the closer to Stirling we go, regrettably, most of that's been built on. Spring Kerse comes right up towards the hard standing dry ground that I spoke about earlier on. And just across here, you've got Broom Ridge and Broomfield, all housing estate. So if there was a battle in this area, we're in danger of losing it to urban development. And I think it's very important that we remember the past. And I hope in the near future more archaeology can be done in the remaining areas to try and determine once and for all where did the Battle of Bannockburn and the Scots and Bruce's greatest victory take place. I've come to an area north of the A905 and to the west of the A91. Stirling Castle's to my right hand side here up on its crag. To my left hand side is the Bannockburn, which is on the far side of the A91, and behind me here, this line of trees behind me, that's where the Pell stream runs, and it runs right round here. Now in day 2 of the Battle of Bannockburn, many people believe that the battle took place on the carrs to the south of me here, and that the English were pushed back into the boundaries of the Bannockburn and the Pell stream. Some of them crossed there, fled to the Forth and drowned, and some crossed across the Bannockburn there. Now I'm sure in the panic of battle they would have fled in all directions. But I do have a number of questions about the locations. Now I'm not saying it didn't happen here. It seems a possible and a likely location. But there are some questions I would like to raise, and perhaps you could help me answer. If the battle took place here, and many people believe that the English camp was here, some of the writers back in the day suggested that one of the generals had said to King Edward, to the English king, that as the Scots advanced into the battle, that they fall behind their own camp. And as the Scots came forward, they'd be distracted by ideas of plunder from the English camp. And then when they were distracted, they should attack them. But the English king said, no, I don't need any distractions, we'll take them head on. Didn't work out well for him, but that was his decision. Now my thoughts are, if the camp was in this area, where did the English fall back behind? Because if they were hindered during the battle by the boundaries of the Bannockburn and the Pell stream, surely they would be hindered as they tried to fall back behind their own camp, because the Pell stream and the Bannockburn's there. They would need to cross it. Unless, of course, the English camp was further to the south, nearer Balquidderock Wood. But then that raises a question, is it too close to the Scottish camp, who might be tempted of a night attack, and the English would have feared a night attack? So going south perhaps takes it too close to Balquidderock, although there is room. Having it here has them hemmed up against the Bannockburn and the Pell stream and leaves no room for the English to fall behind it, as was suggested by one of the generals. And I guess one of the other options is, did the English camp on the north side of the Pell stream? Now they could have crossed, as I suggested earlier, at the Bannockburn where the railway bridge crosses it. It's a potential fording area. Come up here and crossed again with difficulty. And we know the ground to the north of the Pell stream was harder and faster than it was on the carrs here. Topographical surveys have shown that. So it might have been more suitable for camping. Who would want to camp in what was a peaty, marshy area on this carrs here? So did they go to the north of the Pell stream? And if they did do that, is it possible that the battle actually happened to the north of the Pell stream? That would mean that the Scots came down out the woods over this way to the north of the Pell stream, through Springkerse, which is behind me here over my shoulder, and pushing the English back into the Bannockburn that way. It's a thought, it's a question that I pose, and a potential. If they did come through Springkerse, regrettably that's all been built upon, and the chances of finding any archaeological stuff there is going to be very minimal. However, we are left with areas like this. We've got the carrs, we've got this area which unfortunately is up for commercial sale, and in the near future it's going to be built upon. I think that's a travesty, an absolute travesty. Until we have done a proper archaeological survey, a thorough archaeological survey on the areas that are left, does it not make sense not to carry out any further development? Because if the battle did take place in this area, is it not likely that we can find some of the evidence of that? Now they reckon anywhere, they say the English were well hammered and that a lot of people were killed. We don't know how many, but even if you suggest that anywhere from 500 to 1500 were killed, we know that they were buried on the battlefield because that was written about at the time. Now, even after 700 plus years, I'm quite sure with all the modern science that we've got that we could find the traces of where 500 to 1500 people have been buried. And if we could find that, we can definitively identify the battlefield. If we don't find it, if we do a thorough archaeological survey looking for the bodies, and we don't find it in any of the undeveloped areas, it can only lead us to believe that we've probably built over the existing battlefield. And that would be a shame, but nothing we can do about it, I would suggest. If we do a thorough archaeological survey and we determine, or we find something and we determine where the battlefield actually was, conclusively, we should be raising the largest saltire in Scotland above it. Because it's important that we remember our past, our history and our heritage. It determines how we go forward, doesn't it? And I think it's crucial and very important to the heritage and the history of Scotland. So can we do that before, regrettably, any further development takes place and we lose forever the potential for finding conclusively where day 2 of the battle might have taken place?